Well, happy Tuesday, everyone. Apologies. We didn't think you got the message the first time, so we decided to play it a second time. How does that sound? Oh my gosh, Dr. Ramin Modiri, it seems like forever since we've had a show.
It does, yes.
So, welcome to the Dr. Laurie Davis Show. Still broadcasting here, of course, under the network of the Disability Channel. And so for us, it's just we don't care what the titles are. We just know we're here, and we're welcome back, Ramin. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be back. I want to, by the way, wish our audience and everyone you a wonderful New Year. I can't believe you're in 2025.
I know.
Five. I mean, 2020 was like, uh, an awakening, and it's like, no, it's 25 years later. What happened? And
Oh yeah.
yeah.
And my sister reminded me, bless her heart, in 2000 when the millennium and everything switched. We had this huge New Year's Eve party at our property. And we invited all of our clients and our business partners, and the party lasted for like 3 days. It was like a huge event. They got hotel rooms. I could sleep a lot of them myself, but we hired a chef and we did this big gala dinner on the New Year's Eve. And then the next day, everybody was trashed. And so we rested. I hired a DJ who was there for 3 days. He played music like for 3 days, whether it was
Wow.
calming music, dance music, whatever. And then the next evening, we had a 50s party. So we went from serving prime rib the night before to hot dogs and hamburgers and cherry blossoms the next night. And my sister reminded me, she said, Laura, that was like 25 years ago. So babies who were conceived in 2000 are now adults. 25, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. So, what about you? Any New Year's memories that you want to share? Do you have one or two that, something special that you did?
Um, no, well, you remind me of that 2000, Y2K and all that, and
Yes.
that's something that it just seemed to happen. It was a crisis. It just reminded me, every the 2020 we had COVID, and of course today we're going to talk about the fires of 2025. So it's these like fives and zeros, some type of a crisis.
Right.
It's like, oh, come on,
Cool.
you don't need any more. But
No,
yeah, but
no.
New Year, I'm just grateful, when you have teenager and young children. Well, daughter's 22, but when they're home with you celebrating the New Year, that's like the most memorable. They
Right.
decided not to go out with their friends. I mean, their friends came over, but it's still, that's a blessing. So that's my
Yeah.
memory.
Yeah.
Having, it's been years, just having them with me. So I
Yeah.
was like, oh, great. That's like the best thing, better than any parties. But anyway, so yeah.
Right on. Right on. So we had no idea when we were going to come back together on Tuesday for our show that today we would be talking about this travesty of fires in California. And I'm finding it very hard not to watch it, but then I can only watch it for so long and then I have to
Yeah.
turn it off. And I think that's the way with most of us. But it really triggered for me because, of course, a year ago, May, we were personally evacuated in our town in northern Alberta here. So that, getting that knock on the door, because that's how it starts. You get that big knock on the door and you have 10 minutes to get out. And you have no time to do anything but gather the clothes on your back. If you have a pet, your important papers, which we keep in a firebox anyway. So we grab that and not knowing where you're going. It's a really scary feeling to feel homeless because a lot of people don't understand what that feels like. So I'm reminded of my own experience, even though fortunately we came back 2 weeks. We were gone for 2 weeks, then came back and everything was okay. Our homes were intact. But those flames were licking our doorsteps. They were right on the front entrance to our 2-hour town, and we only had to evacuate 8,000 people. I can't even begin to imagine evacuating 100,000 people. So it's just on a big, larger scale. So you're in Orange County, Southern California. So let's just start with your perspective, because you're in a safe zone right now, and a little bit about that. And then we're going to get into the finances that are attached, not just for the state, but for individuals. So I just want to end with this before we go to you. I saw this beautiful couple today on the news, 62 years married. On the day of their anniversary, they lost everything. On the day that they were married, 62 years. And it was just so hard. Even the newscaster was in tears. So over to you. You're there, so you can give us a live perspective on what is going on right now.
Absolutely. Um, Let me start with I've had, like you, I've had some personal experiences, and it's amazing how your life is immediately just changes your priorities, your emotions, and the things that you were worried about, all of a sudden they vanish. And my first experience, and it it's very difficult to actually put myself in the position of when you lose everything that you have. And your home is really is part of you. It's your identity, memories, and all the other things. It's very difficult to see. But my first experience was in 1980s. I was a young man, and we had an investment property for family. And I remember standing 2 in the morning and seeing this big building just vanishing in front of my eyes. I mean, I'm standing with the firefighters, and they're just helpless. They said, "We are sorry, Mr. Modiri. This is it. This is," and that property, it was intentional. We had one tenant who didn't want to move, so put the cigarette on a mattress. And the sad part is there's three other families there, so you really endangering other people. These That's why these multi-families, I mean, it's like, it's not just about you. But anyway, I just remember just standing, and you are just frozen. The thing was, it was not my properties. It was not, I don't have to, in a way, of evacuate or anything, but the tenants had to. And so that was like a rude awakening, how the system worked, how the things happened. And there was no accountability, by the way, after that. So, but I can imagine how, when you lose your own property, but your memories, how it feels. And my second experience was, it was in 1993. And if you recall, we had Laguna Beach fires. I was in October visiting, I was in Manchester, England. And one of my friends is watching the news and says, "Oh, Ramin, this is in your neck of the woods." I lived 5 minutes from Laguna Beach at that time. And it was amazing. You're helpless. You're in another country watching what's going on. And all of a sudden, that reality hits. And of course, we will talk about the economic part of it. I mean, these houses, there weren't many, but it was Laguna Beach gets part of these on the hills, and they rebuild it, and they keep rebuilding. We have mudslides, we have floods, all that, and it happens. And my third experience was, I think our audience might remember, just 3 months ago, um, we are right by Saddleback Mountains, and we did have a fire, and we were notified that we should be evacuating soon. So I'm putting all the documents together, making sure, the kids are, my son, we are all okay. And in the backyard, it was like the eye of the Lord of the Rings. We could see how close it was, and you can see the smoke around these flames. But we were so grateful, and not very lucky, actually. The wind overnight just changed, and it went away from us. So I've come across these things, and as I said, like you said, in 10 minutes, you have to take everything that you can imagine. So when it comes to fires, it's not just, we will discuss the economic side. It's not just the tangible things, your properties and obviously the economic effect on your livelihood, but it's the intangible things. It's the memories. I mean, the pictures of your loved ones and the documents you just said, but it's the memories, the valuables. You have paintings, and on top of that, some of these houses are generations after generation they were handed out. So
Yes.
grandparents' memory, parents' memory, it's gone. And the amazing things about this fires, they was just so quick. I mean, because they're very congested. It's a very, it was not spread. So it was, hits one house, the whole neighborhood is gone. And that's the devastation. So I truly, I mean, I'm not in it. We are probably 45 minutes, 50 minutes away, but I can just feel it. And I know a lot of people have been affected. I know my friends, they've lost houses. I know our friends, family members have lost houses, their homes. I should say it's not even a house, their homes, and it has no discrimination. There are a lot of wealthy people, affluent, but a lot of middle class people. They lost their really big part of their life, and I would say like a big part of their identity with that. So.
Yeah. And that's what needs, it's not just the house that needs to be
Mm.
restored, it's all of that. Knowing that it's not just a building, our home is our sanctuary, or it should, and if it isn't, it should be.
Right.
But attached to that are things that cannot be replaced by any amount of money. And
Absolutely.
then I think about right now they're scouting through the houses looking for bodies. People who decided not to evacuate, or who didn't get out on time, or were incapacitated, maybe, handicapped in some way and couldn't get out, and all the animals, and not to mention the wildlife. Everybody's been displaced.
Yes.
A lot of people, animals have been displaced. And where do you go? Where do you go?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the economics, and then we'll come back maybe and talk a little bit more about the emotional cost
Sure.
attached to these losses. And tomorrow, I'm actually going to do a second show with a friend of mine. His name is Keith Denoncourt, and Keith is a first responder and retired now from that, but was a first responder. And his town of Slave Lake, Alberta, burned to the ground about I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years ago now.
Wow.
But he's going to talk about that and what that's like from that perspective. So thank you for coming in today to talk about the finances, because this is all anybody's really talking about. I saw a member of the FEMA organization interviewed this morning and what they're trying to do. And then there's all the donations, and then there's the scammers, and then there's the looters. And this is still all around the physical aspect of the loss. We haven't even touched on the mental. So, from a financial perspective, with your professional background in finance, what is it that you would like us to know today?
Okay. Excellent. Yes. Again, I would be like you just mentioned. We leave, although again, the mental, emotional sides, it creates that vicious economical side. It's almost like when our health is affected, when become due to whatever it is, we are not able to perform our job. We become disabled, as in a way of not performing things, and um, that creates that vicious cycle. Because number one, we are not able to do things. The bills are not quitting, so our obligations are still there. Then there's that mental anguish, and then we get that stress anxiety, so we can't even go back to perform our jobs. And on top of that, what happens is, as I mentioned, we are not making any revenues, and basically that creates even larger vicious cycle. So that one part of things. But what I'm gonna emphasize mostly on like you mentioned, the tangible things. Of course, the loss of properties, and then on top of that, again, the loss of revenues. Businesses have gone out of. The
Yes. Yeah.
employees, they have contracts, they have things that they had to perform. So not only they don't have the revenue, but they still have those obligations, and that's something completely, again, devastating on its own. So we will talk about, mainly because you're talking about homes. So we look at the real estate, the effects on the real estate, and the value, immediate, intermediate, long term. What is going to happen to the future of the city or the surrounding cities? People coming back. So we will look into that. We look at what happens to their mortgages, what happens to the insurance, which plays a big role in this, the effects and the role of the insurance in all of this. Also, we will look at demographically, about talk about displacement. Do I want to go back and live, let's say, in Pacific Palisades? It's a bunch of dirt right now, and you will see, it's going to take 3 to 5 years in average to build it, and we will discuss that. Do I want to live there? Do I want to go for somewhere else? Or do I want to just leave the state and go for somewhere away from the danger or somewhere more affordable? So there's a lot of these discussions. On top of that, we will look at the effects on the general, like the GDP of the economy in United States. Will that affect that? Because we've had the hurricanes, we've had, again, other disasters like last year. And by the way, this disaster here, they still don't have their finger on the figures yet, but it looks like it's going to be the financially the biggest devastation we've seen. We had Hurricane Katrina, we had Hurricane Helene. The highest was about 225 $250 billion. It looks like this is going to be larger than that. I mean, it started with 20 billion, went to 50 billion, went to 150 billion. We are at 250 billion. It's going to get much bigger, and it's just not the value of the properties and anything, but again, the effects of the future of business, the revenue generations. And believe it or not, what is happening in like Florida with their hurricanes that they've had, they're still trying to deal with it. I mean, this is a long process. The fires of Maui a year and a half ago, they're still trying to do things. So this is not a short-term solution. It's going to affect many people's lives. So that's what I was going to focus. But also, there's something else you have to remember. We have 2026 Olympics in LA, which is next year. Then we have 2028 World Cup coming to LA and United States. Well,
Whoa.
mostly it will be Mexico, Canada, United. That has to be into consideration. So LA is in the heart of all of these major events. And so what are we going to do about that? So basically, that will be on the financial side that I like to discuss things. Let me start with the real estate, because that
Okay.
is the biggest damage which has been. I mean, you're talking about from Malibu to Pacific Palisades, it has gone close to Brentwood. And so we're talking about tens of multi-million dollar houses, but there are some also other houses where people who in the middle class that they've lost. So the damages are tremendous. The question is, how is it affecting the real estate in a short term? Of course, there's no buildings. So what are we going to do? There's no value right now, right? It's just a land. So in a short term, we have these displaced people. Well, where are they going to live? I mean, we're talking about, we still don't have exact figures. We know about 10,000 structures minimum. We're talking about 100 to 150,000 people maybe. So they have to find a place to just be around, because now with the insurance side, you got to be around for the adjusters. You got to, you got to go see what you have left. And of course, you talked about looting. That also presents a problem. So uh, all of a sudden, because of that, as I mentioned, some people might not want to stick around, but some
Mhm.
people want to wait. They might want to buy a new place. So from immediate side, you will see appreciation in the price in the neighboring cities, whether it is Beverly Hills, Bel Air, Brentwood, again, with the higher end. If they want to stick around, maybe they want to say, well, we will buy a house. So immediately, of course, there's a supply and demand, right? Some people who were not willing to sell in, maybe 6 months ago or 3 months ago, they're going to put their houses for sale. So, and then there's the rental side of things. People who
Yes.
need immediate occupancy. I have children who are going to school. Well, I still haven't made a decision. I have businesses. So what we've had, unfortunately, some people have taken advantage of it. I mean, all of a sudden the rents have gone to the roof. But there is a rule in California: you cannot increase the rent, for instance, by more than 10% within the 30 days of a disaster. So, but there is that supply. So there's going to be a lot of demand for rental properties. So in the short run, we will have that. In the long run, though, would that depress the prices? Would some people say we just don't want to build, or we want to go somewhere else in the state of California? So Pacific Palisade might be, I'm not sure, but it might be a ghost town for a while, because in average, all the disasters that we've looked at, it takes 3 to 5 years to rebuild. On top of that, imagine the number of contractors you demand. How they going to imagine the workers that they demand and where they're going to stay. Again, what do we do with the housing for the workers, the construction workers? On top of that, we are in California, one of the most red taped states in the country. On top of that, Malibu, Pacific Palisade, they have even bigger red tape. And they look at these, as far as the occupancy, the certificate they have to, but they call it the coastal certificate to permit. It could take 7 years. Suzanne Summers, before she passed away, she lost her house to the fire. And it took her 7 years before the house was built. So we have bureaucracy, the red tape, on top of just the natural, again, influence of the markets, how they're going to be built. I mean, some of our audience, if you've done any type of improvement to your house, like a kitchen, my God, it takes a year, and the dust and all the thing, you got to live in a hotel and come back. And it's like your life is messed up for about a year. Imagine when the whole house is burned down. So that's one thing that we have to take into consideration. And of course, the effect of the rebuilding on the cost of material.
Oh, I know.
We look at concrete, cement, copper. We already seen a little movement in price of copper, although like China is about 50 to 55% mover of copper. But all these material are needed. And since 2019, the cost of supplies for building material is up 31%.
Oh, yeah.
31%. So if I'm going to build this house, I got to pay a lot more than what it was 5, 6 years ago. Some of these people have their houses for 30 years, 40 years. So what happens to that? So those are the things we have to consider. I will, in interest of time, I'm going to move on from that to the part of the insurance, because majority of people, they've had mortgages and they've had insurance. Now, some of them, which they didn't have mortgages, so some of them voluntarily let the insurance go because it was so expensive. Some of the insurances, they don't have fire insurance part of it, as we've had, like with flooding, as we've had with the hurricane. a lot of things in like Florida, North Carolina, they did not have hurricane insurance. So where's that? How are they going to get compensated for that? What's going to happen? And again, I have a firsthand experience with the insurance myself. My previous house, it was on top of the hill. And I was told when we were doing, of course, we got the mortgage ready to go. When you have a mortgage, you have to have insurance. They will not allow you to have the closing. So we found out there was only 3 companies, and this is 2007. We only had 3 companies willing to insure us, and the price of that was very high. And they said, well, because of the hill is in a fire zone. And I said, what do you mean fire zone? It's like, but we've had those exemptions. But since then, it has become more strict. And just a few months ago, State Farm just left the state. In Florida, we've had insurance companies, they've lost so much money, they keep leaving. So when you have, first of all, a smaller number of insurance companies, obviously the prices will go up because they become selective. And then state of California, because of, I can understand why, but they said, well, everybody has to have the insurance. They told the insurance companies, listen, you cannot exempt, you gotta. So that's the reason, few insurance companies, they just left. They said, we don't want to deal with the headache. So when you have a few insurance companies, obviously they become the only kid in the town, as they say, and they dictate the prices. They say, well, this is what's going to happen. So there is going to be a big, I think, crisis just from the insurance side of things. And I would encourage, if anyone, living in that, those any kind of a disaster area, this is a good time to start reading your insurance policies. Because what happens, the adjuster, which is, who does adjuster represents? The insurance company.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to come and they're going to try to lowball everything, the material.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So generally what happens is there's a lot of negotiating, and that also delays the thing. Their job is to just get things settled as quickly as possible. And I'm not even talking about the business. I'm just talking about just the simple homes. Imagine if there was a specialty in other things. And one of the things when I used to do my financial planning business, I always encouraged my clients to have a rider called guaranteed replacement rider, which allow guaranteed replacement cost, which by law, it was only $1 rider, by the way. It allowed you to rebuild your house the exact same amount or the same shape or whatever it was, the same material, regardless if it's gone up, material up 100% up. Insurance company was obligated to build that house the way it was. State of California doesn't have that. Insurance companies do not have that. So what they do, they have to build a house to the 100 to 120% of the most is 120%. So the insurance company comes, builds the place for 100% of the value that you're insured. So we don't have that guaranteed placement, but you can have a little additions up to 120%. So you could have a little additions. But here lies the problem. The problem is, let's say you have a mortgage that, let's say it's a $5 million mortgage, and your insurance was worth $3.5 million. Your mortgage is at $5 million at this. They're building a $3.5 million. So that's, you're still responsible for adding to build that property the way it was. So there's a lot of gray area. And one thing I would recommend, just again, our audience, if they're in that area, if you ever get hit with the disasters, is there are some private adjusters that you could hire. They could be attorneys, if you like. There's a pros and cons for it, but they represent you. So they go through your insurance and they start talking to the insurance adjusters, negotiate things. If you have like a multi-million-dollar home, it might be advisable to do that. So Now, if you don't have any insurance, and now we have the government programs, we talk to FEMA, there is FAIR Act, and that. But again, that's wait and see. You're at the mercy of the government and what they're going to offer. Do you talk to anyone in the hurricane hit, regions, around the country, especially East Coast? So it's not a lot of fun. And unfortunately, this is not a short process. It will take a very long time. So that brings me to the mortgages. I mean, majority of people, when you talk about multi-million-dollar homes, well, they have a mortgage. So what happened to your mortgage? So I don't have a house. Do I pay for it? Yes, because you have an obligation. Now, like what we had, the financial crisis, you know, mortgage companies will work with you, but that doesn't mean that you don't owe interest, you don't owe payments. They would do forbearance. Maybe, you can buy 3 months, 6 months, they put it at the end, maybe a year, but that's the negotiation. And it all depends on the mortgage company, the financial companies, how they're going to do that because they understand the pressure. But from legal point of view, because you do have an obligation, you are responsible for payment. So you see how from everywhere you
Mm.
have devastation, and yet you have this. On top of that, what happens to your property taxes? You don't have a home. Do you pay property taxes? Well, again, state of California is working on it, but legally, believe it or not, majority of your property tax is based on your land. It's not
Not the
the
house.
not the house. So although you don't have the house, although you don't have the structure, you still owe property taxes. So again,
Wow.
you're hit from everywhere, and that's the responsibility of, again, negotiating with your authorities. And as I mentioned, one of the biggest challenges that we have is getting the permit. Now you decided, yes, I
Mhm.
want my home back. You have to wait 3 or 5 years. You have young children. I'll give you one example. The average age in Los Angeles is 37 years of age. Now, when you're age 37, in San Francisco, it's like 39. San Diego is about 35. So LA is 37. 37 is a very transitional, or the 30s, and transitional year. Generally, we are married. Maybe we have a couple of children. We're starting a business because we know 40 to 55. Those are big, especially 40 to 50. That's the biggest financial reward, our biggest money making years in our lives. So I have to think about, as a 37-year-old with two children at this situation, what do I want to do? Maybe I have a business. Do I want to build a business in this area? Do I want to build my house back? Do I want my children to grow up in this zone, which is about 3 to 5 years? To Am I willing to be patient? Or should I tell my spouse and say, you know what, maybe it's time to move on to somewhere more affordable, less bureaucratic, maybe less political. And that's when it brings me to the political side of things, which is the exodus away from California. California is a beautiful state. I mean, you've been here many times, but there's a lot of problems we have, and it started many, many years ago, of course, with the regulations. That's another thing our audience will understand. Would the regulations go down after all this? No, I can tell you, with the insurance, with the property, things are going to go even worse. What happened? So, do I want to deal with that? So, if I'm in a situation, this is the time to make a decision. Since COVID, since 2020, the state of California had 1,234,000 exodus. That means they left the state.
Whoa.
So, the largest state in the country, they have moved away from California. The second state is New York, 870,000 or so. We also have, after that is Illinois. After that, we have New Jersey. After that, we have Massachusetts. 5 states. They have lost big numbers. It could have been the regulations, taxes. There's a lot of commonality. When you think about it, there's a high regulations in the states, high taxes. And in this situation, I won't be surprised if more people would use that as an excuse to leave California. And guess what are the top 5 states that they have welcomed the uh, these migrants from other states? We have Florida, Texas, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Arizona. So it looks like more people, more businesses might leave California as excuse from these areas, go to, well, Vegas would be a good place because it's not too far. So that would help real estate maybe in Vegas. Arizona is another uh, good choice for moving. But one thing I have to say, and I don't want to be political, but this is the reality. The top 5 states that they have lost population, the 5 of them are all blue or Democratic states. 5 states who have received again the population, all 5 of them are Republican or red states. What does that mean for the future of, when we talk about um, as far as the politics? Remember, each state gets delegate representatives based on their population. Each, again, zone or each county based on their districts, they receive based on population. So when you lose more and more population, then you will have less and less number of representations and delegates. So when things move from blue states to red states, that means that the red states, just because of the population growth, they will have more say. They will have more representatives, more delegates assigned to them. So these movements of migration, they have consequences. And until, like, again, the state of California decides to become attraction for businesses, things are going to continue. And COVID was one really big catalyst. And I think this is another catalyst. It's a wake-up call. So again, this is just the purity of the politics of things. I just wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's very interesting.
yeah. And,
So I have a question for you. If it
sure.
might be not, if it's not the right time, just let me know.
Oh, no, it's perfect.
So we know that you're an expert in the area of the markets and the stocks and all. How is this affecting the markets right now?
We've done studies. So generally, with all the again, we are such a big country that generally natural disasters, they do not affect the GDP as much. So we've
Okay.
had large hurricanes. It does affect the local businesses. As I
Mhm.
mentioned, it could affect the commodities. And one of the biggest things it could affect, so that's on the short run, is we just had last week, we had an unemployment number, right? So
Mhm.
now all these people are not going to work. Businesses are closed. The same thing we had with the hurricane. There could be a blip in unemployment number could go up, or also an unemployment or unemployment claims, because some people will not have a job, that could go up. So from that point of view, we could have that, which could have a consequence, although it gets adjusted. Now, if it's a long term, then we will see that could affect the economy in a way it might slowing down. But on the other side, with the material and other things, that could be inflationary. So that could affect, on top of everything else is going on with the demand coming, that could affect again in the short term, which could have effects on, for instance, the central bank's thoughts about what should we do with interest rates, for instance? Because
Mhm.
it's always in any business or any family, or we always worry about cost of living, and also our the bills that we are paying, the interest on that is whether it's the mortgage. And now if the rentals go up, what will happen? That's inflationary. So
Mhm.
in a short run, when you have the housing, so those are the things that could be affected. But in the long run, in smaller countries, it's huge. But in United States, it does not affect the GDP as much unless there's
Okay.
like multiple disasters.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a long lasting, if you remember, in 2005, we had a Hurricane Katrina, which
Yes.
so many people, tens of thousands of people,
Yes.
10,000 people, they lost their lives. And the other thing is, going back in it's the displacement. We found out even people who left New Orleans, for instance, they do not go back. So
No.
people from, again, we're talking about in California, that area, there's a good chance, whether it's the memory or with the again economical pressure, they might not ever go back. So who knows what will happen the future of this beautiful city, which again, I
Oh,
know you have been there, and it's just
yes.
gorgeous. It looks like a war zone. It's just
Mhm.
like a movie. And so that's from
Wow.
the uh, yeah, from economical point of view. But on
Right.
top of that, again, we have to think about Olympics.
I
They
know.
have to rebuild. They have, the good news is there's a lot of stadiums, and I think, but again, the housing, the people are gonna come from all over the world. So believe it or not, I did my thesis in 1990s, and my thesis was about what happens to in a World Cup, what happens to the stock market when a team, like for instance, either hosting or winning the World Cup. In a nutshell, in the long term, it didn't make any difference. The stock markets, especially in developing countries, are not that big. So it wasn't. So after all that I did the paper, and after me, there was two large. There was three around a British company. They spent $150 million to do the study that I did for
Oh,
free. They could have paid me like, if they would have
they could
given
have
me
given you 10%, you know?
yeah, 10 or even 1.5 million, I could have given it to them. But
Yeah,
anyway,
that's
I
right.
found out there's no correlation, but there is a short term relationship, which is they usually get a boost. Why is that? Because there's economic building. You're hiring on these people. You look at China, you look at Greece, you look at Spain, look at Brazil. There was a boost. A lot of resources go there because there's a funding from Olympics, the TV rights, all the money's coming in. The sad part is it's very temporary, and majority of these places, when you go back after the, for instance, Olympics is being the big one, and then the World Cup, they are a disaster. There is nothing, they never, because upkeeping is expensive, they never upkept it. So if you go to Athens, if you go to Brasilia, you go Sao Paulo, Brazil, unfortunately, it has become a waste of money. So in a short run is a stimulus. So we will see the World Cup in Mexico, Canada, and United States in 2028. So that will be economic stimulus. In the long run, hopefully, again, they're more like Canada, United States, they usually keep up. But again, with 2026 Olympics, they will be a lot of rebuilding to begin with. So, and it's not too far away. And we saw that in Qatar. In Qatar, they did not have, for World Cup in 2022, they did not have enough room for people to stay, the visitors and construction workers. So they had these containers, they put them on the
Yeah.
ship. People were living in those. And it's a hot 120-degree desert in Qatar, and these
Oh my
people are
God.
living there. So, anyway, so I hope we won't have those in LA,
Mhm.
but that's another thing we should be considering. So,
So right now too, that Olympic event, they could very well, would there be a chance that they would pull out of LA and choose somewhere else, or they're committed? Um,
No, I mean, still, this is local, so they will be able to do the things. So I doubt it's so late. And
mhm.
if there's alternative, we don't have a lot of time. We do have a lot of facilities, but it's the
Yes,
presentation and other things. So I doubt it. And a lot of money has already been,
invested and spent.
invested in this. So I doubt it. And, you know, a lot of it, it's like 5, 6 years in advance, all these negotiations to
Oh
go
yeah,
through. And, believe it or not, President-elect Trump was one of the big factors that they got it in LA. So I don't think they're going to let it go. So
no,
that will be,
no,
so it could be positive in some ways. So they will be
yes. A
rebuilding.
reason, give you a reason to
Right.
do things, right?
And hopefully the red tape will be lower. But again, these houses, it's going to take a long time. It's
Right,
not an
right.
overnight. So,
Well, when you were talking about building materials and so on, I know for a fact that in 2000, before COVID, if you went to buy a
mhm.
sheet of plywood here
Yeah,
in Alberta, it cost $38. Now it's over 100, and it never went back down. That's what it cost
you
during
don't,
COVID and after, and then they didn't reduce the price. So how many sheets of plywood would you need to put up a mansion? Like a lot,
yeah,
right? And that's just
absolutely.
plywood. That's not gyprock and bricks
Right,
and cement and oh my goodness sake.
right,
Hmm.
right. No,
Yeah,
totally right. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, maybe next week we can do a show on the emotional side of things because I think that's just as harrowing.
It's
Um, our good friend Doug Smith, he shared with us that the trajectory of the mental anguish from COVID won't reach its peak until March of this year. So it's been building, 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 and then it's going to be reaching a peak where our mental health care systems will, they thought they had it bad before. It's going to be worse now. And so, people are falling out, and which is, bringing me to my timeliness for my books and so on, because
mhm,
it's all part of that healing. And this fire in California, I can't even begin to imagine
right,
the numbers of people who are right now thinking about nothing's going to be worth it, and I might just decide to go now.
oh, right,
Because that happened, did it not, during the Great Depression,
yeah,
right? And when your value is all tied up in what you have and that goes away, then I may not value what I've got left, which is my life. And that's how serious this is. But they haven't even started talking about that
no,
yet.
not yet. I mean, we
That's
are
not
just
even in the
shocked.
conversations.
It's just the shock, anger. That's what's
Yes.
happening right now.
Blaming, pointing
Yeah,
fingers, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. And I was thinking too, as you were speaking about people who've lost their homes, but maybe they owned that restaurant or that convenience store on the corner,
Absolutely,
and now they've lost their, as you
absolutely.
said, their income. They didn't just lose
And
their
their
house, they lost their
employees.
job, right?
But they have employees who probably didn't live there. They came, they drove some. What do we do? We can't pay our
Right.
employees if I don't have a business. So you see that again, this side effects of that
Well,
affects
even they were
many
talking
families.
about, excuse me, sorry, didn't mean to
No, no,
interrupt.
perfect.
Even though and even when they were talking about, a concert that gets canceled,
Hmm.
okay, and there've been a few of those already. Then you're talking about the backstage help, the caterers, the maintenance, the cleanup guys, the videographers. I mean, it's not just the person on the stage
No,
that's lost money. It's a whole industry.
absolutely. I mean, yesterday, well, last night, I don't know if you follow, it was the playoffs for the National Football League, right? So
Right.
LA Rams, they were
Yes.
hosting the game. They were supposed to play in LA. They were playing Minnesota. Well, they ended up going to play in Arizona. Simple things like that. So, the fans had the tickets, so they had to drive. It's a 6.5 hour drive from LA to Phoenix. So that's what just a simple thing like that. I mean, have
Right.
been affected. So,
All
but
the
we are watching.
sorry.
No, no, I said we will just be watching. My daughter is leaving on Sunday, going back to New York. So we are watching it, flights from LAX, for instance. I mean, there are a lot of little things. If the winds changed tonight and tomorrow, how the things are, you never know. There's a lot of unknowns. So,
Yeah, and I think that's what creates a lot of mental anguish because we
yeah,
like to be in control of everything.
absolutely.
We want to know where we're going and how it's going to work out, and you know eh, that part of us that wants to be in charge and in control of our lives, that disappears very fast. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, very
Well,
true.
thank you for all that terrific insight and information. I know that we'll have lots of people click on this because this will probably go to the US. Your home TV will want to pick this up, I'm sure. And all of our beautiful friends in California, we had a meeting last night and some of them were there. And one of our clients, they were away for a week during the fires and they came home last night. And she gave me permission to mention it that they had a letter canceling all of their insurances and they have rental properties. So, what happens there to our landlords and people who are providing housing for those
Mm.
people who can't afford a home? Now they're impacted. Unreal. So, any words of encouragement from you before we go? Our time is almost up. We have about 4 minutes.
Well, I think, well, in any crisis is a time of reevaluating our priorities
Oh,
and
yes.
also looking at our every single day as how precious it is. And it is every moment counts. If you have a loved one, hug them. I don't want to be, but it is something that we have to value our moments. And physical things is the preparedness. We laugh. It's like, oh, they say be prepared for earthquake, and say, oh, it's never gonna happen. Well, it's always good to have your affairs in order. Do it now when there is no crisis. Have your packages ready, and you know if there's a food or dry food or other thing, because as I mentioned, like you did, in 10 minutes we were supposed to evacuate, and at that moment your brain is not really we, at least in my situation I was just like thinking, well, what is the most important documents I gotta take? And but when you are comfortable and you're settled, that's the time to make those decisions and be just ready. So, but anyway,
Yes.
but there is
Yeah.
this shall pass, and we have our health, and just we are
Hmm.
grateful for that. So,
Hmm. Hmm. Absolutely. So you've been listening to the Dr. Laurie Davis Show, my co-host, Dr. Ramin Modiri, and on Tuesdays, we're always on here to talk about business and finance. And little did we know before the new year that we would be having this discussion and that you are located in California and you're there firsthand to help our viewers understand what's going on from a different perspective. So thank you for that today. It was really informative.
thank you. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
All right. Well, we'll be back tomorrow, new time, 12 o'clock Mountain Time. And my guest will be a good friend of mine, Keith Denoncourt. And Keith was and is a retired first responder, retired high school teacher. He did all of that other stuff as a volunteer. And lo and behold, the very town that he protected and looked after for years burned to the ground, Slave Lake, Alberta. And he's also an environmentalist and wildlife expert and videographer. And he's going to share with us from the ground, the boots on the ground view of being involved in the fight.
Right.
And that should be very interesting tomorrow. So join us tomorrow. So let's say bye for now, Ramin, and you'll be back
Thank
next
you.
week with us, I know.
Yeah.
And thank you for everyone who's watching. So
Yeah.
bye for now.
Bye bye.